we are really glad you could be with us. We know how busy you all are, and we are happy to have you with us. And we hope you will continue to let us know your thoughts. Thank you for letting us know who's out there. That's really helpful for us. We had about 265 folks from DSSs register from 78 different counties across the state. So this is obviously a topic of interest and very timely right now for our state, so we're glad you could be with us. If you, this one last chance while I have this slide up, if you have not yet had a chance to print out the handouts, you can click on that link that's on the slide and it will open up a PDF of the handouts for you that we'll be referring to throughout the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available through NCSW Learn if you have other folks at your agency who may be interested. And you'll hear me say this again, but we also, our presenters have said they are very happy to do a follow-up Q&A document. As you may know, we've done in the past for other webinars. So we are eager to get started and to hear your questions and concerns. So let me go ahead and get started with our agenda. So we have actually, we're going to start with our goals. So our goals are to update all of the counties on the plans for round 3 of the CFSR, to consider what might be some possible outcomes and implications for the review for everyone across the state, and to answer any questions that you might have. And of course, our ultimate goal is to continually improve our state's child welfare system. And so we know that this CFSR is taxing and sometimes overwhelming, but also an important part of helping us do that. So we're glad to have you with us to talk about that today. And here is our agenda. I'm going to do some very brief introductions and an orientation for folks who have not taken webinars before. And then you're going to hear from our presenters on what to expect from round 3, what is involved in the CFSR, and also how will county DSS agencies be affected. We'll also talk a little bit about what will happen after the review, and then we'll have time for Q&A. But please do use that chat box throughout our time together. That is the main way you have to communicate with us. I think you've all found it already. You can use this chat also to let us know if you're having any technical problems. But right now, we would love to know if you can go ahead and chat in there if you have any particular questions or goals of what you would like to get out of this morning's webinar. Please go ahead and type them there, and that will help our presenters as they talk to you this morning. I'm going to keep going, but please do type and we will be sure to capture your questions and goals. You do also have these little icons. I'll just point out, you see the little waving man at the top of your screen. It brings up a drop-down menu with some different little pictures. It's another way to let us know if you're with us or if you have questions or need us to adjust our volume. So just want to point that out to you. And most importantly, I want to introduce our panelists today. And I know these folks are probably familiar to all of you. You do have a very short bios for them on page 2 of your handouts, but I will just start by saying you probably know Kevin Kelley. Kevin is the Section Chief for Child Welfare Services at the North Carolina Division of Social Services. Terri Reichert is the CFSR Coordinator for Child Welfare Services. And Rita Bland is the REAP Coordinator. And she is also an interim team leader for 2 teams, the Quality Assurance Team and also Regulatory and Licensing. So we are really happy to have them all here with us this morning. We also have both Philip Armfield and John McMahon on who both are my coworkers here at the School of Social Work, and they are available to make sure we capture your questions and try to respond to any technical problems you have. I will just mention, if you send in a technical problem, they will probably reply to you. You will see down at the bottom, one of their names will light up at the bottom of the chat box. It will turn probably yellow, and that will let you know that they are sending you a private chat to try to respond to your technical issues. And they do that just to kind of keep it off the rest of the chat box so the rest of us aren't distracted by that. Okay. So I am just looking to see if folks have particular goals or questions, and I don't think that I see. So okay, there are some there. Okay, so we're capturing those, and we will try to answer those as we come up to those different sections. So thank you for doing that. So just a word about why we are doing this webinar, and we want to just mention that the #1 reason we're doing it is because you asked for it to be done. Many of you participated in a survey back in August. It was a statewide survey. We had over 1,000 people participate, and the Child and Family Services Review was the #1 choice for directors and program managers of what you all wanted to hear about in training, webinars, and publications. Of course, you also know that we are in round 3. It's this year, 2015, and so, as I said, it's very timely. It's another reason I think the division wanted to share this information with you. And of course, as I mentioned, it's because it is an important matter, important issue. The CFSR is really how we measure our performance as a state and how well we achieve outcomes for children. So for all of those reasons, we wanted to bring this to you, and we're, again, excited to have our presenters with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Mel. Welcome, everybody. Wanted to start off by just trying to lay some groundwork and set some understanding of what we're going to cover here today. Everyone probably has some experience with the CFSR, so we weren't exactly sure how to frame this, but we're going to try and give a very broad overview of the CFSR as the federal government defines it. North Carolina had, in the first 2 rounds, experienced a process that has had some changes to it, but again, since we weren't sure exactly who knew what about the first 2 rounds, since that was a rather narrow select of counties, 3 in each of the first 2 rounds, we're going to try and, again, provide that broad overview of what to expect. So the next slide just really outlines some of the content from ACF with respect to the CFSR, and again, I'll say this is our 3rd round of the Child and Family Service Review, but we're excited about some of the differences and the changes ACF has made, and they've made those changes in response to all states as well as partners, research and other university-type partners, because we all recognize that child welfare is a very complex and complicated set of programs and services. So anytime you try to measure performance on something so complex, it's going to automatically have some weaknesses. I think the federal government has done a really good job of responding to the feedback. It is still true that the CFSR has several components, so we're going to try and, again, go over some of those, and then, as best we can, answer any questions. The applicability of all of this will vary from county to county, and you'll see that as we walk through where we are and what the federal government has set out for us. But we do believe that understanding more about the CFSR will help all of us, because ultimately the goal, as we've said, is really to help North Carolina improve their capacity to better achieve the outcomes we all know and seek for our families that we serve. So that's just a very broad overview, but we want to also put it in some context that Terry's going to speak to.
Okay, now we have technical issues resolved, and I can tell you a little bit about the Child and Family Services Plan. Every 5 years, we are required by the federal government to provide a plan on not only how we're going to deliver child welfare services, but also to expend the funds that we get, and to make sure that we're meeting all the requirements that come with those federal funds. And so for this 5-year plan, which is 2015 through 2019, we took a hard look at where we are in our system and maybe where we need to look for improvements. So to think about our plan as the way to move our child welfare system forward, how to improve outcomes, how to work within our systemic systems that affect our outcomes, and really to provide an overview of where we are as a state. So how are we performing on safety, permanency, and well-being? Are we working well with our court systems? What do we need as far as implementation to help make our work with the court system go better? And so in our plan, we have identified what we thought at the time was the direction the child welfare system in North Carolina needed to go. So our plan that we developed identified one overarching goal for North Carolina, and that was to expand REAP statewide. And we identified that to expand REAP, we needed a number of things in place to do that. We needed to have project broadcasts expanded statewide. We needed to have a child welfare practice model identified, primarily around the provision of in-home services. And we also needed to make a stronger connection with the system of care coordinators for services. And so as we started to look at our plan and looking at the different aspects to it, and Kevin's going to talk a little bit more about outcomes and systemic factors, we realized that we may need to change our goals and objectives based on the information that we learn from the CFSR, which is the measurement of how we are doing on meeting the aspects of our plan that we identified.
Great, thanks, Terri. This is Kevin again. I'm going to speak now to some of the components of the CFSR. One of the changes the federal government has begun to make is making that connection between the CFSP and the CFSR. I think it's fair to say that process is very early in that stage, but we wanted to also set that same tone so that you had some context for what has been an ongoing requirement is that Child and Family Services Plan, and whether you know it or not, you've had input into that plan in the past, but we didn't always explicitly state that, so we thought this would be a great opportunity. So the CFSR really has two different sections for how they measure states. One we're all very familiar with, safety, permanency, and well-being. Those are referred to as the 7 outcome measures. And then there are 7 systemic factors also played into the CFSR. Rather than, that just gives you that broad overview. In the same context, there are 3 different ways that those 14 different areas are measured. We have the statewide indicators, which I'm going to speak to a little bit. There's the statewide self-assessment. I think Terry's going to talk to you more about that. And then we have the actual on-site review, which is probably the part you're most familiar with in looking at those case reviews, applying that federal instrument, which is referred to as the on-site review instrument. And there are, you will be able to see, particularly in one of your handouts, Appendix A, how those overlap between the way the federal government measures us on those 14 different items. So I'm going to just try to briefly touch on some of the statewide data indicators around and the national standards, because those have had some pretty significant changes. And like we said earlier, there are 7 different outcome measures, 2 outcomes related to safety, 2 related to permanency, and 3 related to well-being. The data, or aggregate outcomes, measure safety 1, which states that children are first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect, and permanency 1, which is children have permanency and stability in their living situations. And from that, we have 7 different aggregate data measures. Those are familiar to you even if you don't know how they're reported up to the federal government in the NCANS or National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System. That data is derived from the Central Registry. Many of you probably know it by filling out the DSS 5104 form and some of the accompaniments to that. And then our AFGARS file submission, which is derived both from the Child Placement and Payment System, sometimes referred to as the 5094, but also we have to report on adoptions, which is captured in paper at the local level, both in public and private agencies, as the DSS 1808, or Report on Proposed Adoption. That's after the adoption is finalized. So in order to submit an AFGARS file, which is actually done twice per year, the state has to merge a data set extraction from the child placement and payment system with a data extraction from the data that's keyed in at the state level from that DSS 1808. We refer to it as the Adoption Index Management System, but you don't see that ever, so you won't have any knowledge about the AIMS system. But that's how the federal government obtains it. It is a national data set, so every state must submit the same set of data and the same valid values from their source system. And as you can imagine, right away there's going to be some challenges there because as each state's policies and source data, how they capture the information is different, it will force it into a single set of data that must be shared across the state. But wanted to also at this time point out that North Carolina, on those 7 outcomes, we did issue a Dear County Director letter that tried to summarize that for you, and that's in your handouts as well. We met the national standard on 1 of the 7 outcomes. Several more were excluded due to data quality. And I know that sounds real depressing, but what I think everyone will fairly quickly recognize is that North Carolina's current system for identifying a child is the SIS number. And SIS numbers, since they cannot be transported across counties, or at least in most cases cannot, then the federal government has recognized that. North Carolina has an AFGARS improvement plan. And because they could not ensure that we were capturing all of our data, and particularly around reentry into care, accurately, they have decided that they cannot give us a reliable measure on several of those items, again summarized in that handout. The good news is we're working diligently to incorporate child welfare into NCFAST, which will resolve that matter. And the federal government obviously understands that. They have approved NCFAST for child welfare. So that's part of the struggle we will go through in the CFSR for this year.
So Kevin, thank you. And before Terri talks about that second element, I just want to make sure everybody knows Kevin mentioned the handouts. So in those handouts on page 3 is that Dear County Director letter, which explains those statewide data performance measurements and all the details of those for North Carolina. And then the Appendix A that he referred to starts on page 6, and that goes through all of the outcomes and indicators in great detail. So if some of you are less familiar with those, in the handouts there's a detailed explanation of all of that.
Okay, thanks, Mel. So Kevin talked about the data and how data is used to tell us how we're performing on our outcomes, that safety, permanency, and well-being. And so just really wanted to remind everyone that the state data profiles that Kevin talked about speak specifically to the outcomes, that safety, permanency, and well-being piece. On the other side of that is we talk about the systemic measures, and for those systemic measures, that's more of an assessment of how we're doing, an assessment that is done by talking to our stakeholders that are involved with these different systems, as well as taking a look internally to see if we need to improve on any of these items as well. And so for the statewide self-assessment, part of the CFSR, we were required to complete that assessment, and we have just completed it, so I can maybe talk a little bit more about where we see possibly some changes that might need to take place. And as we were preparing our plan and preparing for the CFSR and started digging into what different systems are affecting our outcomes, we started to find that data collection, data analysis was our biggest barrier. pulling information out of the system, being able to make those connections. And so when we looked at our CFSP, our plan goal of REAP expansion, we've kind of had to take a step back and say, we're not sure if we can meet the goal of REAP expansion statewide until we step back and make sure that our statewide information system is functioning at such a point that we can say, yes, we have the right data available. We can get what we need to determine if we are going in the direction that we need to go into. And so the same is true when we talk about our case review system. That is our partnership with the courts and looking at how do we share data, how can we share data, what data do they collect that we would like to have and vice versa. We talk about our quality assurance system, which is where Rita will give you a lot more information about how we are going to look at the case review portion of our system. And then we also have sought feedback not only from our county partners but also our university partners around our training system. And I think I can say fairly confidently that one of the things that is going to happen during the CFSR is a lot of focus on service array and resource development. That is one area that we know our federal partners want to explore in depth with local providers, local workers, as well as those state-level partners that affect this. And then we also look at how responsive we are to our community members, how responsive we are to the gaps in the service needs that are shown to us. And then we also need to take a hard look at our foster and adoptive licensing recruitment and retention plan. As we know, we really have to do better at having a stronger plan. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of efforts around that piece as well. And so now Rita is going to talk with you more about the on-site review process.
Thank you, Terri. It helps to cut on the mic, right? Good morning. I have the opportunity to talk with you about the actual on-site review, and as Kevin referred, this is probably the most common element that you are familiar with, and in the past you probably have heard this referred to as a CFSR. In the earlier presentation done by both Terri and Kevin, the CFSR is the larger umbrella, and the on-site review is one of the three elements, and we certainly hope you walk away with that today. With the round 3, all states have been given the opportunity that was aligned or lined out in the Technical Bulletin 7, giving us an opportunity to propose if our state wanted to follow the traditional on-site review, which is what round 1 and 2 primarily centered around, or the opportunity to do a state-directed case review. In North Carolina, we were coming off the momentum of a 5-county QCR pilot conducted last summer, and then we had our past experience with the CFSR, and this gave us the opportunity to proceed with a state-directed case review proposal to the Children's Bureau. North Carolina has received approval that the Children's Bureau has actually approved our state-directed case review system. And I would refer to the letter in your handout on page 13 that actually is the approval letter from the Children's Bureau. So what does it mean to be approved? There are several things that were required of North Carolina to have in place in order for the approval from the Children's Bureau. We must been able to demonstrate a state-directed case review process that aligned with the national elements set by the ACF. We must have been able to demonstrate the ability to have a random sample of both our foster care and in-home cases representative of our state population. It was required that we use the OSRI, or Kevin has said the on-site review instrument. In the past, you probably referred to that as the CFSR tool, but in round 3, you will hear it referred to as the OSRI. We had to demonstrate that we were able to use the OSRI to complete our case record reviews and document the case ratings on 18 items. As you heard, 2 of those are under safety outcomes, 2 were under the permanency outcomes, and 3 of those items were the 3rd one was well-being, and there's 3 outcomes. There's a quick reference in your handouts on page 10 that actually drills into those outcomes and those individual items. We also must have demonstrated that we have quality case-related interviews as part of our review process. And this includes the interviews with the worker, the social workers, the supervisors, family, caretakers, and foster parents. And lastly, we must have had built into our process a quality assurance component to strive for fidelity in the record review process. These key elements is what we have proposed in North Carolina's state-directed review. What we did, what this allowed us to do was have individuality in our state proposal. North Carolina was the first state supervised county administered in round 3. So I think it's fair to say that we have been building this plane in flight with our federal partners. And with that being said, I think we have a poll question that we're going to use here. Millicent? The roles. The roles. Millicent is pulling up the poll, and we would like for you to take a few minutes and respond to the poll, please.
Okay, thanks, Rita. Sorry for that delay, folks. So looks like just looking at the results, we've got a large number of supervisors, which makes sense, but also about 25% program managers and administrators. That's great. And we know also, of course, some counties do have QA and QI staff, and that we also have a lot of direct service workers who've been interested in this topic. So just waiting to see. So that's a good, we will hold on to this poll too, just that's helpful to us to have a sense of who's here and what your interest in your role might be for your own county. So let me just hide that and turn it back to Rita.
Thank you, Millicent. And that is great to see line social work staff on this call as well, because certainly we know that you are going to be involved in the record review process, as well as your supervisors and your management. So we wanted to take just a minute and talk about how will county DSSs such as yourself be affected. And we just wanted to say that North Carolina has maintained with the Children's Bureau that this is a state supervised county administered program partnership, that the county staff are going to be used as an extension of the division, and that we have embraced this throughout our state directed case review process. We believe that change occurs and is sustained at the county level when there is a learning environment that's embraced by all levels of staff and management. We believe that what is measured is what gets done. And so it is important that for the round 3 that we have proposed the use of 13 counties In the past, you will recall in the traditional, there were 3 sites. In round 3, there will be actually 11 sites. And just take a few minutes, even though you're seeing 13 counties listed on the screen in front of you, 10 of those counties will actually be sites. A combination of Haywood, Jackson, and Swain will represent the tribal population in our state of Eastern Band of Cherokee, and that's why you see them indicated as a site. These counties were selected based on their recent QCR experience and their readiness to do this work, and they are representative of our state child welfare population, as well as recommended by the Children's Bureau that we include our Eastern Band of Cherokee in this review process. The county staff in the 10 counties have been identified their roles in the process as reviewers and quality assurance staff. They all have been trained on the OSRI, or the instrument that you hear us refer to, as well as the OMS, which is an online monitoring tracking system that will be used in round 3. And last but not least, they've been trained in the area of quality assurance. To drill down a little bit about what round 3 on the quality case record protocol looks like, you have a copy of that in your handout. It's a 25-page document. This is how we will proceed in our round 3. We have pulled 120 cases, a combination of foster care and in-home cases, in the 13 counties that were listed previously. 67 of those cases are foster care cases, 53 of them are in-home cases. A small sample of 7 cases will be pulled in the Eastern Band of Cherokee review. I would call that this is a representative of our statewide population. So we had a formula in which we looked at the percentage of in-home and foster care in each one of the counties, and that is how we have gone about a random sample of those cases to represent foster care and in-home. Our sample period, at the time that we actually got the technical bulletin, we were almost approaching our period under review, which is April 1st, 2014 through September the 13th, 2014. We again have started our record review as of April the 1st of this year, so we're in the 2nd week. Our case review will continue through September the 30th of 2015. Our protocol includes a 2-level quality assurance review, both at the county level as our first level, and our second quality assurance review will occur at the state level with state staff. All of this is under the oversight by the Children's Bureau. Now, even though our period under review is for 6 months, all of these counties have invested and committed to a 4-year commitment because they are establishing our actual baseline for North Carolina. And then for the next 4 years, we will be using their record review data in order to establish our progress of our PIP. So we will again use those counties as part of that. The state PIP, of course, the Program Improvement Plan, will affect all 100 counties to improve outcome for all families and children served in our child welfare system. So for other counties, I think you've heard Kevin speak about our qualitative data, which is pulled from our NCANs and our AFGARs. The qualitative data, certainly one way of getting information that's important is through the case record review system. It is a new way of doing business in our state now, and we value as a means for our CQI information to inform where we need to improve and a means to evaluate how our improvement, if what we're doing is actually working to improve our outcomes. As we commonly refer to in REAP, we want to change the culture in which our data, our qualitative and quantitative data, is used as a flashlight and not a hammer. And so that is such a true statement, I think, and relevant to this particular slide. So what is our vision and how does this impact us going forward? It is our vision that all counties will have an internal case review protocol, just as our 10 counties have developed, and that they will be using the OSRI, or the on-site review instrument, for their internal record reviews. The quality assurance oversight, again, should occur both at the county and at the state level to measure our state performance and our outcomes. And Milton, I think we have a few other polling questions.
We'd just like to get a sense right now, as Rita said, since that vision is for all counties to eventually be doing case reviews using that OSRI, just wanted to get a sense of where your counties are now in terms of whether you are doing child welfare record reviews, and if so, when those might happen. So we're just going to give you a chance. We know some folks are with groups, and so you can sort of decide which one is the best fit for your county. And again, please feel free to use the chat box if you want to clarify that or explain another option that best describes your county's current record review process. I see a few counties are typing, but also at this point it looks like about half are using case reviews in supervision, which is fabulous, and then another third are doing case reviews upon case closure. That's great. And then a few counties who are not currently doing regular record reviews. Okay, and looks like, so Gaston County and Catawba, that's great. So Catawba, I know there are some counties doing ongoing random sample, that's excellent, or quarterly reviews, and QA workers in Gaston County, that is great, and as well as Guilford County. We know that a lot of counties have some really wonderful protocols in place, both for QA and also for as a supervisory tool, so that is wonderful. Also had a few follow-up questions we were wondering about to help, as you know, there's more TA and training for all counties. Wanted to ask who right now is participating in your case reviews. Some of you have already said that it's part of supervisors or QA workers, but for others, could you let us know who else is participating in your case reviews? That's great, and I see Union County from Patrick, that's great. So both open cases by supervisors and then QA staff doing it at case closure, that's great. And then there's some folks have staff, particular staff or supervisors, that's great. I'll let other folks respond and also see what other people are doing. And we're also going to capture this just to help us, again, kind of get a sense, a snapshot of what some of the current practices are across the state. And that's wonderful to see supervisors participating in that and staff. That's great. Anyone have community partners or other partners participating in that? It's great. Okay. Just looking at folks, that's great, and letting everyone else. So a combination of QA or CQI teams as well as supervisors and staff, that's excellent. And I know, I'm sure that folks from the division and probably those of us in the training system will be reaching out to some of you to find out more as we try to help counties have a chance to learn from each other and share you know, promising practices and best practices. That's great. So another question we have just to be thinking about as we move forward is, what is one thing, so lots of different models of case review, is there one thing that would help your county strengthen your current case review process? Whether you are not now doing them or whether you have a full-scale QA team, wherever you are, what is one thing that would help your county strengthen your record review process? And I'm going to just give you a minute to think about that. I see lots of folks are typing, and again, we have John McMahon capturing all of this for us so we can share some of this, and I know the division will be interested in terms of TA and training response. A record review tool, okay. So just to mention a few other things. So we have given you on page 1 of the handouts, we have not mentioned this, there is a CFSR portal that we've given you a link to that has lots of information about the CFSR. We also have given you a link to our current, North Carolina's current Child and Family Services Plan. And then in relation to that request, there is also a link to the OSRI, the on-site review instrument, that because it's so lengthy, we didn't include it in your handouts. But Kevin, and as well as that protocol, but it sounds like there might be some other tools that would be helpful. Kevin, did you want to respond to that?
Well, sure. When we talk about tools, I just wanted to kind of put a comment in that we certainly understand that federal instrument, we keep calling the OSRI, that's, I guess, in some respects, a gold standard. It does require a significant investment of resources to implement that with what the federal government refers to as fidelity or consistency, and we know not every county can get there. And we also know it has limitations, so we also are developing a more process-oriented case review instrument, and we've piloted, as I think most counties and staff know, the General Assembly gave us additional staff, and as we're onboarding those staff, they will be using a single instrument, and we will, of course, be sharing that as that is developed. So we don't really see it as an either-or, but as much as a county can build that capacity to get a full picture of their performance is really the goal, as Rita articulated.
That's great, thank you. And also a note here that too of working on that integrated case management system. We know that is a goal that is being looked into, and that certainly having that QA staff is critical. I'm also just going to put out a quick plug for a training event that will include discussion of quality case reviews. We have a revised course that's called Qualitative Data Skills, and it's going to be offered June 16th and 17th in Greensboro, and so you can find more information on that on NCSW Learn. But thank you for that, and we will capture all of those. Let me take that away. And I'm going to pass the mic back to
Thanks, Mel, and thanks everybody for your input and your questions. John is capturing them for us, and we are seeing a lot of really good input from you. So the next piece that we wanted to talk briefly about was what happens after the review. And I know historically, and it's really easy to fall into a understanding that this is a pass-fail kind of test. And what we try to stress with everyone is it's not a pass-fail test. It is an effort to try to find out what areas are most needed to be improved, and maybe even point the way to some theory of change that we could implement to know that the corrective action or the program improvement plan that will be needed to be developed in every state is actually having a positive impact on children and families. So I hope everyone understands that having a program improvement plan, or PIP, is not a bad thing. It is a mechanism by which we can identify those areas that we most need to be identified. As Rita pointed out, the federal government is pretty transparent about sharing that the revisions that they've been making are brand new to them as well, and since North Carolina is the first county-administered state and one of the very first states of any kind, some of those details are still being worked out. And obviously we're not yet to the point where we even can start to think about our program improvement plan development. But we do know a couple of things, and that is the federal government has recognized that there has to be some prioritization. If you were a part or could access our prior PIP, all 114 pages of it, it did a lot of activities, but what the federal government's mission is to help states target those areas that will give you the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. So there is a promise or some messaging from ACF that the PIP will be something meaningful for the states, and maybe even something more within the scope of possibilities. In any case, whatever is included in North Carolina's program improvement plan, we want to recognize right up front that this will need to have a strong state-county partnership to help develop that, and primarily through the association, but other opportunities as well. I think we've really developed a much stronger partnership. Certainly, as Rita's talked through the case review portion, 10 counties and the Eastern Band have really built that capacity, and I try to say as publicly as often as I can, without their commitment and their resources and their dedication, we couldn't have been approved, and we wouldn't be seeing the kind of improvement that, or preparation for improvement that we know we're getting ready to see. So thank you for every county that is online today, and every county that across North Carolina for all the work you do every day. We will work together to develop the PIP, and obviously to figure out what are the most meaningful pieces as we negotiate with the federal government on when we get to that stage. But again, we're a long way away from that. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I thought it would be helpful just to have a couple of words. And as we mentioned a minute ago, we want to measure performance in a variety of ways. So I mentioned the process QA. That's the best label we have for it at this point. But that will be doing some of the same kind of reviews that we've begun to pilot, and probably that counties are more familiar with, and maybe even very closely to what you're doing today. In other words, monitoring and checking cases, either at key points or on some random selection basis. Were the activities carried out in accordance with law, rule, and policy? And at the same time recognizing that each family is unique, and that as their needs and strengths present themselves, were they followed up on? But process QA is sort of one other end of the spectrum, unlike the OSRI, which is a very deep dive into a case. This process QA is less deep, but then also allows us for measuring, like I said, compliance with law, rule, and policy, but also obviously having a much greater number of cases. And we hope to be able to collect and, to Terri's point, analyze that data moving forward. And so we are developing that instrument in a way that will allow us to collect the data rather than having it retained on paper. We also still have REAP. I don't want anybody indicate that we're not moving forward with that REAP effort. It is, in some ways, in the context of the CFSR, and we're working very diligently with UNC Chapel Hill's expertise and assistance to document the model of REAP so that we will have a more defined set of criteria of what REAP looks like as we expand beyond the counties that have been exposed to that to date. Unfortunately, we're all still very familiar with 4E monitoring. ACF was in North Carolina last year, and we passed our federal measurement, and we will continue to follow up on 4E eligibility determinations, both in foster care and adoption assistance. In North Carolina, the state auditor also looks at 4E. Unfortunately, we did have a finding in the most recent report that's been released, and some of you might have seen that. Some of the media outlets picked up on that. We are still seeing some significant problems in particularly adoption assistance, eligibility determination. So the division is working to support counties with that requirement for 4E eligibility determination. And then lastly, but certainly in no means leastly, we want to continue to receive feedback from our customers. And you see customers is in quotation marks because we think of the youth, we think of their parents, we think of their caretakers, but we also think of our community partners who without them we couldn't achieve what it is we want to achieve. So we're hoping to become much more nimble, if you will, with things like satisfaction surveys or feedback from them. I think we often fall into the trap of we have to have the formal final survey instrument developed and approved before we do that. And what I think ACF is leading the way is that that can be ongoing and evolutionary, if you will, across time, and just to continue to perfect that, recognizing that comparing across surveys that don't match up is probably not wise, but then all of it can be brought together to really form a picture. There is a certain amount of subjectivity to that. Going back to the qualitative piece of that, that's okay. The federal government, I think, has really recognized and helped us illuminate that child welfare will always be subjective. You cannot objectively measure the kind of work that we have to do in child welfare all the time. We push to make it as objective as we possibly can, and certainly when we do have subjectivity, to check with a wider range of inputs and viewpoints so that we center on some understanding of where the research points to in terms of what is good practice. So just a couple of thoughts I wanted to close with, but certainly if we have time, and we do, for some additional questions.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think we also just have a couple more polling questions that our presenters wanted to ask in terms of, as Kevin and Rita spoke about, sort of maintaining transparency. We would like you to answer these two polling questions. I'm sorry, I'm just bringing them up now. How often would you like to be updated about round 3? And what is your preferred method for being updated? So I'm going to open both of these up and let you take these. And again, we'll hold on to these so the division has some sense of the best ways and frequency with which to keep you informed. Great, thank you. And I know some of you are in groups, and these should all be set, I believe, as multiple response. So you don't, if different people in your group have different responses, you can put them all in there. That is great. And while folks are doing that, I see there's still activity on both of those. I'm going to give you another minute. Okay, so it looks like a pretty broad range of frequency. Some people want to know monthly, some quarterly, and some just when there's big news. So I'm guessing there may be a variety of responses that folks can choose, and then lots of different methods, but that's good. The Dear County Director letters and that Child Welfare Listserv, the top 2 responses. So also want to just give you another chance. Looks like those have stopped, so we will hold on to those, but I'm going to hide those polls and just give you a chance to type in other questions or comments. I do want to say, Mecklenburg County, I know you had sent 2 questions regarding the case review process. Rita has taken down those questions, and she will follow up with you specifically to make sure you have the information you need. So please feel free. And here are a few questions. One from Kristen Ickard. A suggestion, we would like to suggest that the on-site review tool be simplified with line staff in mind, removing some of that jargon and instructional guidance on where to find information in the record and what exactly the feds will be looking for. So I don't know if I'm looking at my panel to see if anyone would like to respond to that or has any thoughts about that.
I'll be glad to respond to that a little bit. Certainly the instrument is still 18 items. I think in the past it was 23 items. If you take a close look at the OSR instrument, you will see some rewording to try to clarify the intent of those items. We have spent a great deal of time in the OSRI training that has been done with those 10 counties, as well as the online, the portal that has been referenced here, the CFSR portal, gives some clarification around those items and trying to be more specific about what you need to be looking for in each of those items. So certainly can appreciate the comment or the question there about the jargon, removing the jargon. I think we all that have experienced the use of the previous instrument our feedback was heard by our federal partners, and they have made some adjustments there. So I would encourage you to look at the new instrument as well as the portal for clarification around those, and as we move forward in the state, we will be providing training on the instrument and the intent of those items and how to rate those items.
That's great. So thank you. So Rita, so it sounds like both the division has some training and also want to share thank you to Mecklenburg County that they have also developed some job aids. It looks like that does sort of do some of that breaking down of that OSRI. And thank you for sharing Sherry's information. We'll include that in the follow-up document. And Kevin, did you want to comment on that as well?
Sure. I see Union County has posted what I think is a very good question, and one that I've received a couple of times. So since we have a couple extra minutes here at the end, I wanted to speak to that a little bit. And for those of you who didn't see it as it passed through the chat, the question was that will the REAP performance measures be modified to reflect the new ACF indicators, statewide indicators, and national standards? And to be quite honest with Union County and to everyone else, ACF has not yet released the syntax or the exact specifics that they used and theoretically will continue to use as they developed the measures. They have shared with us that there is a, quote, problem, unquote, with the syntax and the measurements, but not the nature of that problem. So we're a little hesitant to get back out in front of the federal government with respect to their methodology for measuring North Carolina and every state on those data indicators. It is also a little bit of a struggle for us in terms of our current capacity and our contract with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who helped develop the REAP performance measure report. There's a lot going on in North Carolina from sex trafficking and other issues. So we're really just trying to balance all of those issues, but we will update the REAP report as soon as we have the confidence that ACF has done so. The thing I forgot to mention when I was speaking about that is that the biggest change, one of the big changes the federal government made was in terms of the national standard. In prior years, for each individual data indicator, the national standard was set at the 75th percentile of all jurisdictions. We think of them as states, but technically they're jurisdictions who submit data on those. And now the federal government has modified that to more of a national average, if you will. Now that's a pretty blunt way to put what, if you read Technical Bulletin 8, goes into the details, but for us social workers and non-statisticians, we can think about it as the national average. So in order to know how North Carolina is performing on any measure, you have to know where the rest of the nation is in terms of that same data indicator. And they have done so at certain periodic points, but without the federal government sharing that data, we won't be able to update where we are in terms of the national standard. But of course, we always want to improve regardless of whether we're meeting the national standard or not. So that's a really good question, and therefore one that we will need to continue to track with you.
Thank you, Kevin. And also, looks another question from Mecklenburg is that after the CFSR, is there an expectation that counties continue doing the case reviews using that OSRI, that same instrument, or will there be another instrument or method? I'm looking at Rita to see if that's something you want to respond to.
Well, I think certainly, as you've seen from the varying weigh-ins on the poll, we have counties who have not established any kind of record review system, and then we have counties that certainly have teams that are actually doing quality assurance and record reviews in their everyday work. So as a state, I think this is going to be a phasing in. Certainly the OSRI instrument is one way of doing record reviews. At this point, I think it's fair to say in our state, if you're doing something right now, is important in the area of record reviews. And as we move forward and build capacity, then I think you will see us being in a position to support counties to enhance their record review system. Kevin has spoke about the process QA team and some of the tools that they will be using. I would strongly encourage counties to reach out to the 10 QCR counties that are in round 3. They all have established their own record review protocols for the CFSR Round 3, but also we'll be working with them in establishing ongoing CQI processes, which would include record reviews at different levels. And that's the beauty, I think, of Technical Bulletin 7 and North Carolina's model, that we appreciate where counties are and what their capacity is to do this work. Some of our counties, it's been wonderful to watch even our smaller counties be able to embrace quality assurance and actually build capacity and resources to do this work. So it's wide open, I think.
Thank you, Rita. And I do see another great question from Jessica Adams about what are other counties doing to implement change on the front line based on those record reviews. And so that is an excellent question. What I'm going to suggest is that we will include that in the follow-up document because we are at time. And Kristen, let me just reiterate, you do have a link to that OSRI on the first page of the handouts, and we will put that in the chat box as well, so you can link to that tool. Let me just say a few things in closing regarding to make sure that folks who have pre-registered for this get their credit. Also, you do have contact information for Kevin, Terri, and Rita if you have specific questions for them.